Deputy Connolly. And there'll be further opportunity, Deputy Connolly.
An lá speisialta seo lá idirnáisiúnta na man, agus is tótha go bhfuil muid ag déanamh dul chun cén, tá cuaigar a seachtar an seochas ar cuair, so fáilte romh. I'm going to ask a few questions. I think we're going to be interrupted by the voting because it's reduced, but there's so many questions, and I'm going to stick to oversight and control and the local, the audit service and the National Oversight and Audit Commission, and hopefully housing and the underspend in relation to housing in a crisis. So if we just look...
Deputy, I don't want to cut across you, but the housing, especially is in the afternoon.
Stop me if the question, but I'm sticking with oversight.
We've specifically indicated housing planning community after lunch.
I thought it came under this. I thought it came under this, but just in relation to the oversight, certainly comes under this. The oversight. So, as someone who had the privilege, or maybe the torture, just like Deputy Castles, of serving 17 years on a city council, I'm asking my questions because I believe in city councils, I believe in democracy, and I have the greatest respect for staff who are overworked, underpaid in my opinion, and are moved continuously from department to department. However, my opinion in relation to management is quite different. And in my experience, by 2013, we had 7 different city managers in Galway, which creates its own problem. I think you might appreciate 7 different managers from 1999 to 2013. 7, either acting or full-time. So, and also it's a city that the Controller and Auditor General has done a special chapter on the Solis Picturelin, which was supposed to be before us last week but didn't. It's also a city that had major overspend on the Seamus Quirk Road in relation to Ayr Square, in relation to the pedestrianisation of Galway City. Somebody made a mistake somewhere. It's falling apart. And on my time on the council, when we asked questions, we were told the matter of liability had been shelved. The matter of liability had been shelved in relation to the pedestrianisation of the city. That remains a huge problem. So, in that context, the importance of the audit and this new commission is extremely important. It's the one thing that we look to give us hope in relation to accountability. So my question in relation to the local government audited service, how many staff are assigned to that? And if you could just, how many staff? What's the necessary complement of staff? Have they enough staff to carry out their work?
There's just under 40 staff, but if you take out the clerical support, there are 34 professional auditors on.
Okay, how many? What's the full complement necessary?
Sorry, 35. Sorry,
35.
I thought it was 34. That's pretty much where it's been for recent times. They're actually in the process of recruiting further staff at the moment.
Because they need more staff.
Yes.
How many staff do they need?
I think it's 3 is what
they need 3 more.
For.
Are there arrears in relation to the number of audits they need to carry out?
No.
No, they're up to date?
Yep.
Okay.
And in fact, in 20... There was an issue previously in terms of the length of time after the end of the year. That improved very significantly in terms of the 2016 audits. All bar one were completed by October of the following year.
And their audit of the accounts produced by the local authority?
Yes.
Okay. In relation to value for money audits, how many of those? They're discretionary, are they? They're
discretionary, but the audit service has now, I suppose, has adopted a particular strategy working with the local authorities to ensure that the audit process of the annual accounts can be completed as far as possible by the end of September, which will be in line with the C&AG approach, and then for the value for money piece to really be able to use, if you like, the balance of the available resources in the year, so that yes, it's discretionary, but it becomes more and more a part of the process.
Second now, it's discretionary.
Yeah.
How are they identified, those projects, and how many have been carried out? And if you could use Galway for me, Galway City or County, I don't mind which, both.
Generally, the VFM reports that are carried out are national reports, so they don't focus on a particular area. They would generally tend to focus on the service. To date, there have been, I think, 31 reports completed by the value for money unit part of the local government audit service.
Is the value for money unit fully staffed?
Yes.
Does it need any more staff?
It's within the staff.
It's within what you've told me.
It's part of the local government audit service.
And they've carried out 31 value for money?
31, yeah.
And what, on a theme, is it? Or?
Generally on themes or particular service areas, different functional parts of
Can you give me a practical example of that?
So one of the reports, one of the more recent ones, would have been in relation to the performance of local authorities in managing and maintaining their overall corporate estate.
Yeah, that's the Oversight Commission now. They're the themes from the report of the National Oversight and Audit Commission.
No, this is VFM report number 30, prepared by the Local Government Audit Service.
Okay.
Yeah. Other ones that they've just literally finished quite recently is the Coroner Service, which again is a local authority function, but funding coming through the Department of Justice and others. So they're two examples.
So the review of the Coroner Service was a special value for money. Yes. That was of all local authorities, is it?
Yes.
Okay. And what was the first one you said?
The corporate estate. Basically, they're managing their normal corporate estate, their buildings, their yards.
Oh, their estates. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Yeah. And what would have been the most recent ones?
The coroner's one, I think, is probably the most recent one.
Okay. And how are they picked, those value for money audits?
There's a VFM committee which is comprised of the audit service, a representative from the local government sector and a representative from the department. So they identify what the areas of activity should be. And
how do they identify them?
I suppose materiality is one issue. So, for example, if you take the coroner service, I think there would have been a view in the local government sector that funding issues and a lack of funding and their capacity to continue to be able to operate the coroner service was a significant issue for them. So that was, I suppose, the materiality of that was a factor behind picking that one. But materiality would be a significant factor.
What else? What other criteria would?
I suppose pressures at any one particular point in time. They would have done a report relatively recently. I can't remember exactly when, in terms of or which year rather, in terms of the relationship between the local authority and the approved housing bodies. Again, because housing and the development of housing a particularly critical issue at this point in time. Yeah. So that would have been a factor.
I'm going to use parochial examples, but they have a general implication. If we look at the pedestrianisation of Galway City, where it was shelved, the liability was shelved, would it have occurred to anyone to do a value for money audit of that? There were a lot of complaints about it at the time. It remains a mess. I'm not given to exaggeration. It remains a total mess. The precise wording was we shelved the issue of liability for the moment, and here we are in 2018. Value for money audit?
Ordinarily, significant local authority specific issues would generally be dealt with as part of the audit and as part of the auditor's report back to the councillors in the particular local authority. Now, I'm not familiar with the particular example that you're talking about, Deputy, but I suppose those specific local authority issues should form part of the normal audit. If they're of a material variety.
And so the special ones, or the value for money ones, they're more a national.
They're more a national perspective, yeah.
Okay. So then, if we go back to the solace, which will come up before us with the other department, but again, absolute lack of oversight from the department in relation to this. Would that have not been? It ended up as a special chapter from the Controller and Auditor General. So. The question is, how could that happen if the overall audit system is working?
I suppose the solace one.
You're not familiar.
I'm not familiar with it. I think it's.
Well, you see, it comes directly under your department. And I know we're coming back to it separately. We were to deal with it last week, but I'm just raising the issue of oversight where public monies are given for projects.
Okay.
Where does it come?
Well, the funding, I think, for that came
from a different department.
It came through a different department,
okay.
I think. So
you wouldn't be able to.
Galway City Council would have provided funding from their own resources.
Oh, and I understand that. I was there, but the vast bulk of it came from the Department of the Gaeltacht.
Arts and Heritage, I think, Deputy.
Yeah, so you'd have no say in that.
No.
Okay. So then, in relation to the Commission, the National Oversight and Audit Commission, and this was a new dawn, really, in July 14. Another body overseen so that we have accountability, which I welcome. I welcome accountability. So that commission has produced 11 reports, has it?
14 at
14
this stage,
is it? Figure 811, yeah. 14 reports in relation to that. Okay. What type of findings and recommendations have emerged from those reports?
A number of those reports are annual performance indicators reports, so they look across a whole range of activities, and try to demonstrate both in a local authority way, but also in a comparative way, the performance of local authorities under a whole range of different headings.
I see that Fig 811 has set out the reports on page 130 of the controller, chapter 8.
There are three more, obviously, since I think there's 11 there. There's obviously three more since that was published.
Okay. And so what's emerging from those? What are the recommendations? And more importantly, what is the impact then on the local authorities and how are they being held to account?
Maybe if I just take one example, Deputy, the second last one that's on the list in Figure 811 is the private rental sector review. Yeah. That certainly showed a very, very uneven performance in terms of local authority inspections of private rental accommodation, for example. So we, as a department, to the extent that there are issues emerging from reports of this kind that require us to look at sort of policy, legislation or funding. So when we did the strategy for the rental sector, for example, in December 2016, we drew in a lot of what that report was saying around the need to set specific targets for local authorities around private rental sector inspections and, more importantly, I suppose, the need to provide specific funding to local authorities. And that's now moving forward. Funding is provided for this. So that's just one example.
The one after that, a review of the maintenance and management of local authority housing. You clarify what you've learned from that?
From
the last one.
From memory, I think, and my colleague can, was this the one where they engaged with members of the public to...
Yes, and tenants.
Yeah, there was a key feature of that exercise actually was, it built on the one further up at the local authority tenant satisfaction survey.
Yes.
They did that one first in order to try to get a perspective from the customer's point of view, and it actually yielded quite positive results in terms of local authority tenants and the extent to which they felt that the local authority was managing their accommodation properly. On the review of the management and maintenance of local authority housing more specifically, I suppose the purpose of that report was to try to identify best practice and to try to roll that out across the local authority housing system. We were particularly concerned, I suppose, about the extent to which there was a need to intervene with central government funding in order to bring long-standing vacant properties back into use. So this is now designed to be a platform which we will now need to take forward in terms of trying to ensure that management and maintenance, ongoing planned management and maintenance by the local authorities, gets us to a point where we shouldn't really need to be getting back into having to provide significant capital funding, that in effect that the stock and the asset shouldn't deteriorate in the way that it has previously.
That's very important, and I appreciate that. So on that level the policy is good. On the ground in Galway, again I'll choose Galway, I live in an area, Claddagh. There's a house empty for almost 2 years. Absolutely no reason. Let me give you examples and then relate it back to the general. It's empty for almost 2 years. I pass it on a regular basis. Okay, I've checked it. I'm given an answer, it's allocated, but it's not occupied. We're into the language of Kafka. You know, it's empty for the reasons why it might be empty. And then you find, well, it's not really empty, it's been allocated, but then you realise it's not occupied. Okay. So at any given time in Galway, we have 70 empty houses. We have this oversight looking at how to improve things, but at any given time, we have 70 empty houses. Some for major refurbishment. By and large, most of them, no good reason why they're empty. So I'm trying to relate the practice on the ground to the theory. To me, no house should be empty longer than 3-4 weeks. Turnover, done, allocated. So here's an example of a major city, major housing crisis. We have oversight audit commission, we have an audit system, and we have at any given time that amount of empty houses. Where does the department come in?
Where the department comes in, I suppose, again, is a little bit back to what I was saying in relation to the private rented sector. And what we might now move into in terms of management and maintenance is to actually set specific targets and to have reporting done versus those targets, so that those type of situations that you've identified, Deputy, those can be flagged and that they can be responded to at a local level.
I welcome that as a reply, but it's now 2018 with the most serious. It's an emergency. And I'm sitting here as a representative saying that's the level of empty houses. And you're telling me just flagged. These have been flagged for years.
Well, Deputy, I don't have. I was leaving my housing stuff to the afternoon, but no.
Housing is
sorry, I know. Sorry, Chair. Just seeing as the issue has been raised. We have significantly reduced the. I don't want you to get to have a sense that in some way we're now thinking about vacant local authority housing. We have actually put quite a significant amount of money into bringing void housing back into use over the last 3 years in particular, and a very significant number of units have been brought back in. Clearly, you're pointing to a particular example of a house in the Claddagh, I think you said, which has been vacant for a long time. I don't know the circumstances.
Honestly, I'm only using one example out of 70 at any given time, and I hear that there's all of this money, and I welcome it, but the actual reality on the ground is so far removed from what's been said. And I'm not given to exaggeration, so I'll come back to it if I'm straying onto something that's...
Housing is specifically in the afternoon
That's
session.
fine, that's fine.
We're dealing with the transport to roads while the transport people are here.
That's lovely, that's fine. Just back into the transport. The funding for local authorities, and it's been dealt with by other colleagues here. And I know Mr Lemass was at a meeting lately in relation to the County Council and the funding. And it was pointed out by Galway County Council that the third lowest funded local authority in the country, because of the formulae that was used. I know my colleague might have a more nuanced approach to it, but you were familiar with that, Mr Lemass. We met with you, and there was to be a follow-up in relation to that. But we're being told by the county manager that they simply cannot go on with the level of funding that they're receiving. And so then we take it to a meaningful level in people's lives, and we see that basic roads in Connemara, they're falling apart. Bohart, Arta, there's a special application in. Now, I don't want to be parochial. I'm raising it back up as to funding for a local authority by a formula that's Kafkaesque, actually, again, and leaves the county council saying we're the third lowest funded county council in the country, and we cannot repair that road because we don't have enough funding.
In terms of roads, I mean, when I was talking to Deputy Murphy earlier on, I did indicate that the general purpose funding, which is for the running costs of the local authorities, the allocation mechanism and the distribution mechanism for that is going to be the subject of a review. But maybe in terms of roads specifically,
we met just in Mr Lemass. I understood the review was in relation just to the local property charge, the local property tax. Are we on a bigger review now in relation to the allocation?
No, maybe you may not have been here. Maybe earlier on, Deputy. Maybe it was when I was talking to. Maybe it was Deputy Cassell's.
There's a bigger review.
There are two processes. I think when you would have met my colleague previously, I think the overall review of LPT that the Minister for Finance had announced, that was in play. But I was saying earlier that that's one piece of the jigsaw. The other piece is how is whatever pot of money does become available through LPT, how is that to be distributed? And we are going to commence a review of that.
When is that going to commence?
Very shortly. It's just with the Minister at the moment, so he'll be making an announcement shortly.
A review is going to commence. Is there a period of time?
The Minister will announce those details. I can't give you details, Deputy, before the Minister has signed off, but I'm trying to be as helpful as I can, but there'll be more information shortly.
Okay.
Sorry? The ultimate success story for an accounting officer, Deputy.
Just in relation to...
The afternoon is only getting started.
So just specific questions on libraries and all of that, it's for this afternoon. It's not for... That's okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. No, that's fine. Public transport, please. Can someone enlighten me as to what funding is going in the direction of public transport? And just guide me a little bit in relation to this, because, again, we have from the ground almost to there of transport strategies in Galway, public transport strategies, and we have a city that's choking at its seams.
Deputy, I suppose through the various agencies dealing with transport, and through the local authorities in terms of some of the city grants, some of the sustainable projects. That is distributed through the National Transport Authority, and I know that Galway and other cities have benefited from various programmes over the years.
You refer to you refer to public transport projects, special projects, I think in your opening statement. Did you?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
I don't know. I was wondering what you were referring to. Maybe I've got it wrong.
I suppose there are a range of city-based schemes that local authorities.
New transport projects on page 3. It seeks to cover the annual maintenance requirement for the network and allows some limited funding for new transport projects.
That was specifically referring to roads projects.
Specifically to roads?
Yes,
okay.
yes. And it was around that study, I suppose. It was primarily a study looking at the need to maintain the network we've got, quite separately from the need to invest in further pieces of infrastructure.
And in your opening statement, you refer to a MAP road project, which helps local authorities to monitor and track the performance of the road networks. Again, just to elaborate on that, and I'll finish on that.
Yes, that's just a system that helps the local authorities deal with assessing the quality of pavement of the roads in the local authority area, and allows them to deal with issues such as the working with the utility companies in terms of accessing the roads for utility-related works that need to be done.
It's not in relation to the status of the road or the maintenance of the road. It's in relation to utilities using the road.
It's both to do with the state that the road is in at a particular, and assessing that, and it's also to do with the utility companies accessing the roads for the works that they do.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now,